Today, I'm really excited to have Logan Underwood on the podcast. Logan is the CEO and co-founder of Ad Auris, a new platform that allows you to take text articles and translate it into podcast-like audio on your favorite podcasting platform. Prior to Ad Auris, Logan went to the University of British Columbia and got a dual degree in international business and finance, and he also went to Sciences Po in France, where he got a degree in international relations and affairs. Logan is also an alumni for Next Canada, and Ad Auris was one out of 8 startups to be chosen by the New Normal cohort by XX, as well as being part of the Google Startup Accelerator and Antler New York City cohort 2021. It was great to have Logan on the podcast and get to know how he's taking traditional experiences and trying to bring it into a new format so it's more accessible to more people, as well as more convenient, as well as talk about the audio space in general, which I think in the last 3 years has really exploded. So with that said, I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hello, Logan, and welcome to the podcast.
Hello.
Yeah,
Thanks so much
super
for having
excited.
me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on and talk about Ad Auris. But before we get into Ad Auris and all the best, all the great things about your startup, I like to start with the story first. So everybody has their story, and what is your story that got you into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, absolutely. No, happy to share. My background, I think, is pretty typical, honestly, of a lot of entrepreneurs. So I grew up in the States, and actually, my family were all like small business owners. So my family had a bagel bakery, and so from the get go, like, was just surrounded by this idea of being your own boss. And I think that kind of was really where the bug was caught in terms of considering about entrepreneurship as a viable alternative. And then honestly, like, moved up to Canada, in to Vancouver along with my twin brother and my mom. And the plan was to do university here. During university, ended up in France for 2 years as part of this
Oh, wow.
program, between Sciences Po Paris and UBC. So yeah, just like a lot of new experiences, I think. And then during that time when I was coming back to UBC, at studying finance at UBC Sauder, I took a gap year and was working in finance over in Toronto. And my twin brother was at U of T during that time. And one of the summers I had been working in New York at like an innovation consulting firm. My brother had been working with a couple colleagues out at U of T on a startup called Arzella that
Mhm.
retooled, kind of machine learning models, and epidemiological models to understand how information spreads across social networks. And I was fortunate enough to be able to pitch that to the consulting firm where I was working at, so Sylvain Labs. Huge shout out for even like giving us the opportunity, but they brought us on to some amazing client projects with BlackRock, WNBA, Waze Carpool, and we were suddenly using our platform, and they were paying us, and we were working with these fantastic people.
Mhm.
And that was really this like clicking moment when I realized if you are providing value and that someone is willing to pay for, and you're really solving a pain point, you can do anything. Like, it doesn't matter how young you are, it doesn't matter those barriers if you're, constantly just putting yourself out there. And so that was really, yeah, that was the impetus to say, okay, you know what, I'm actually going to be considering entrepreneurship as a viable alternative. Because previously, I was headed down the finance track. I was working in capital markets at the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. Like, that's where I thought I was going to be heading.
Mhm.
But then, yeah, that was kind of really a crucial pivot point for me. And then I went into this program called Next 36, and Next 36 is pretty popular here in Canada, but where effectively its thesis is that there is an aspiration gap between Canada and the US. Canadian university students, if you go on to campuses like U Waterloo and top campuses across the country, and you ask graduates, what do you aspire to? They're going to say things along the lines of, I want to head the robotics arm at Google. I want to lead the machine learning division at Facebook. And you go to the US and you ask a similar question to top university students over there, and they will say, I want to create the next Google, I want to create the next Facebook. And so
Mhm.
Next 36 whole thesis is that they want to push young folks to try and understand and dare to take that leap into entrepreneurship, to understand that it's a viable alternative to management consulting or finance or engineering. And so that kite kind of environment, and then also that social network, was really what I think created just enough safety for me to consider jumping out
Mhm.
and giving it a go. So yeah, it's been a lot of different instances, but excited to be where I am.
Yeah, no, that's a super interesting story. I mean, you jumped around a little bit all over the place, but you eventually found your place, and I think it's great to see the work that Next 36 is doing, because I feel similar sentiment, especially like you mentioned, like at U Waterloo, because of the co-op program. Every time I talk with a lot of my colleagues, they want to just work in industry and just go up the ladder there, which is totally fine. There's no issue with that, but definitely, like I know how well they could succeed entrepreneurially if they created something from the ground up, and the amount of value that they could deliver doing that. And it's sort of sad sometimes to see them not even consider that path. So to see Next 36 as somebody who's trying to contribute in that space and push Canadians towards that,
Yeah.
is definitely super inspiring.
Well, I mean, even to that point, and like you mentioned, U Waterloo, I think like the velocity accelerator out of U Waterloo, like you're starting to see these pockets of just really great ecosystems emerge. Others that I can think of for sure, like Velocity,
Mhm.
but here in Vancouver, you have League of Innovators by Ryan Holmes starting to try and build this critical mass. So the movement's definitely in the right direction, and I'm excited to see where it goes, and excited to be a part of it. Really,
Yeah, for sure. And I think we also see like a lot of Canadian innovators right now who did their time in Silicon Valley and now are bringing those resources and experience back to Canada. And especially in the last 6 years, even from the time I entered university, I've seen completely change. So I think the next 6 years is going to be even more of a drastic change. So super
yeah,
exciting stuff.
definitely.
But I think what's really interesting there, and is that you jumped around, you tried the exchange program out, you went to Next 36, you helped your twin brother out with his business. So, like what was your thought process when you're pursuing these things? Is it just, this looks interesting, let me just try it? Is it part of a master plan? Like, how do you decide what to do next?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a great question. I think what I have, and this is all kind of post appraisal, but I think like one of the things that I've become more aware about in terms of my decision making, and now is something I very consciously use when looking for new opportunities, is I think optimizing for like speed of learning or opportunity for learning.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is, when I went was going and heading out to university, this dual degree program appealed simply because I would have 2 years and a degree in international relations, and then 2 years and then a second degree in finance, and that was really appealing. But then, I mean, as these opportunities have emerged, I think what I realized is that the fastest way to learn something is to try it yourself. And that really resonated. I mean, like you mentioned, the co-op programs. Like I think that's one of Canada's really hidden, like secret strengths is the strength of its found co-op programs. And that for me, like I was studying finance, but then it wasn't until I had to go and work and that you really learn kind of the ins and outs, and you realize there's a large gap between the theory and the
Yeah.
practice. And I think that same sentiment was one that then applied of like, okay, like I want to be entrepreneur, but just trying to get out there and do it. And in my case, what that meant was, in the co-op that I was at, that consulting firm, was trying to just like get some of the partners on coffees and describe how I thought maybe I could help with some of their client projects. And that's the wonderful thing I think about so many of these instances is you never have a master plan, but it's just about putting yourself out there, and I think trying to optimize for learning, and that's where things will compound, and before you know it, you find yourself in a startup.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And And yeah, definitely. I think yeah, trying to optimize for learning is one of the key ones I've heard from a lot of different people. And I think that's one of the, honestly, like, outside of course the lucrative nature of a startup, that it can become lucrative nature and being your own boss. One of the things I've really heard that drives people towards making their own startup is just the learning opportunity. And you have that at a big company, but not to the same degree that you have to do at a startup. So definitely that makes a lot of sense in terms of choosing what to do next. But I guess, sort of related to that actually, and I know, this is something I grapple with, and I know a lot of startup founders grapple with. Is, you know it even though startups can be lucrative, like I mentioned, definitely, like, especially in technology, going the job route, going the corporate route is very lucrative, and it's a lot more less risky. You're more
Yeah,
guaranteed a certain amount of income, and you can make a lot of good money in the corporate route. So
totally.
I feel like every startup founder has to have some reason of why they stick around to startups that isn't related to money, because if it was just money, it's a lot better ways of doing that most of the time. So what is
Yeah.
your reason for sticking around? Like, what keeps you in startups and makes you not go to the corporate route?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it initially was this idea of like optimizing for learning, but I think like very quickly I also found that like the community of people that I was exposed to by beginning kind of this entrepreneurial journey has just been phenomenal, because you end up around people who have self-selected for maybe not going the traditional route, or who kind of think a little bit outside of the box, have these different perspectives, but then also at the end of the day, everyone is addressing different problems, working on different businesses, and they care. And what carries through all of these, these folks, is just this intense passion to try and beget change. And I think that is something of an addictive experience, because it's hard to find another environment where that's so exciting, because the pace of change is so quick, be it in your own startup, be it in others around you. The appetite for just trying to like go out there and do it is really high, and so you become, what becomes normalized is a really low threshold for action. um, and that is something that I think moving into a corporate environment, where a necessary aspect of a larger organization is more infrastructure to try and coordinate a larger group of people. But I think that that can sometimes find itself at odds with some of those elements that are common in the entrepreneurial space. And that for me has been, so far, it's only, I'm still only a couple years into my career, but so
Yeah.
far I think that that is definitely going to be one of the sustaining reasons to stay in the space.
Right, makes sense. And yeah, I'm pretty young in my career too, but based on my perspective, those are pretty wise words. So definitely makes a lot of sense. But let's get into it. I know every entrepreneur really loves talking about what they're making, the product, the startup. So I don't want to hold back too much on that. But let's talk about Ad Auris, and just to give our viewers some type of background on it, it's basically a platform to easily convert text into podcast like audio. And so if you have an article, you can listen on Google Podcasts, Spotify, and on your native podcast app, and the article will be converted into audio. And you guys recently launched on Product Hunt. You got fifth product of the day, which is a pretty big achievement. And yeah, I'll throw the links in the bio for Ad Auris, and I'm sure you can explain a little bit more about the work you guys are doing and everything behind it. So starting off though, like, what was the motivation behind Ad Auris, and what was that inspiration the team had?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first and foremost, a great summarization of what we do. That's kind of spot on. Um, and I think where Adoris really came about was, I like so many other startup ideas, it started with somewhat of a personal frustration, and
Mhm.
nothing extreme, but something that suddenly felt worth digging into. And so for me, Adoris really began with, I was always commuting, an hour out to UBC every day, and finding myself going from all of the long form articles that I had begun to read in the morning to inevitably on that commute reverting to a podcast or something in audio. And that was when I started to think, you know every time I'm switching over to these podcasts, I rarely come back to the articles. I'm dropping off. And what's frustrating is that I already know what I want to consume. There's really great information out there in these articles, and it's just a friction of the medium.
Right.
And so what I started to think of is, okay, well, if I'm experiencing this, there's got to be others that, have a similar sentiment. And that was really the beginning of just beginning to ask people if they had, made attempts to try and listen to written content or to content that they could otherwise read. And so really the first two questions emerged were, one, will people listen to information that they can otherwise read? And then the second one was, okay, answer when we answered that yes, people, given the opportunity, will listen to articles that they could otherwise read. Question number two was, okay, well, how good does that audio have to be? And what we realized, and what was quite startling, is that people were willing to undergo an incredible amount of friction, pain, poor experience just to get the accessibility of the audio.
Right.
So we came across people who were literally like highlighting the entire article and playing it through the accessibility voice on their phone as they drove to work, and going through URLs being read aloud and all ads and all of these things, the HTML in the page, all of those things just to get that audio accessibility. And so what we really began to understand is, okay, if people want this, then how are we going to create a business around this, or, further validate that we believe this can be a massive opportunity. And the
Right.
vision that we came to is like, look, at the end of the day, there is so much written content out there on the web being produced, and yet people day in day out are increasingly spending more time listening than they are reading.
Right.
In North America, you have on average people spending about an hour plus a day listening to spoken word content, compared to about 20 minutes a day reading. And so we look at those trends, and we look at then how much content is being written, produced in written form, and that mismatch is where we suddenly really thought, okay, you know what, there's a massive opportunity here. If all of that information that is out there and available on the web is suddenly turned into audio, the medium that more and more people are opting in to choose from, then we can both provide a lot of benefit to you and I, because suddenly, we go from 20 minutes a day where it's possible to read something, to the 4 hours a day where it's possible to listen to something.
Right.
But so not only the individual, but also the publication. If you're a publication creating a lot of written content, and yet people are only reading a fraction of what you produce, you benefit massively by being able to more accessibly deliver that information. And yeah, so it just came down, though, I think at the end of the day, to the insight that convenience really trumps all. If you can provide the same information in a more convenient way, or simply give users the option, right? You have now, as an individual, the optionality of either reading or listening. And that is suddenly very empowering.
Right.
And yeah, so that was really where we began, and what became really enthralling about the issue and the space. But it began by just that kind of individual experience, and then trying to extrapolate to, okay, I think that this is a common enough situation, and I'm fortunate enough to not need audio. But what we quickly realized is, be it screen fatigue, dyslexia, or even vision impairedness, like there are so many other use cases where audio is just fundamentally needed for accessing that information. And we had a fantastic mentor who told us something along the lines of, you know, accessible design is good design. And that was a revelation that came about and was really cemented when we started to work and speak with some of the communities where, they had a large population of them were vision impaired. You know, designing a system that allowed for a rich audio experience that resonated not just with this community, but with a lot more people. And so, yeah, that's been, one of the really rewarding and exciting things building this out. And like you mentioned, we've just seen a lot of we've begun to see the kind of the fruits of our labor with Product Hunt, and we've started to really see some growth loops occurring across social platforms like Reddit and TikTok and the like. So yeah, it's been good.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, for sure. I think and I think the two things that really stand out to me in that is accessibility and convenience. And first, touching on accessibility, like you mentioned, the audio form for the most part is the most accessible to the most people because it requires the least amount of like physical attention, I guess you could say, because you can just plug in and keep going. And then in term and then yeah, and then like it's you're using your hearing, so it's a medium we use every day. It's a medium we love to use every day, and I think for most people, it's what they like to get their content through. Sometimes video as well, but I think audio is a primary thing in there. And so definitely getting content that isn't only available from one medium and allowing it to be accessible to other people is huge. It's absolutely huge. And even in our information heavy society today, where everything is you can get information everywhere, we still have those limitations. So breaking down those limitations is definitely huge. But yeah, that second point you mentioned there, like that convenience and that accessibility part, I think I really fundamentally believe that when you have a product that offers convenience to a huge sector of the population, the people who also benefit from the accessibility part of it, um, they get a massive boost from that because the product isn't only geared towards them; it's also geared toward another huge part of the population. So it really sets your product apart for success. And yeah, no, I'm really excited to see the work you guys are doing and how far it goes because, like you mentioned, publications need it or want it because their content is able to be shared with more people and listen and consumed in more opportunities, and people want it because yeah, audio is huge. People love audio.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you really nailed it on the head. I think with those two elements, we're setting ourselves up for an exciting opportunity here, and we've begun to see it, and it's been just really gratifying to hear some of the feedback coming in from all segments of our user base.
For sure, yeah, and I think going back to audio content, I think that like in the last 5 years, especially, we've seen that there's been a huge resurgence in audio content or huge boom in audio content, and Clubhouse and the rise of podcasts are examples of this. I remember when I started my first podcast, the Almost Dropouts podcast. At the time, it was like September 2019. And one of the reasons I started it is because there weren't a lot of podcasts out there for student internships. Um, and so at that time, I was one of maybe 5 or 10. And today, there's hundreds and maybe even thousands of podcasts on those topics. So we've seen audio completely blow up in the last 5 years. So I guess getting your perspective on that, like, why do you think we're seeing this huge resurgence in audio content or this huge boom in audio content?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the vision, and the best way to answer this, I think, is going back to kind of the vision that we have at Adoris, which is fundamentally kind of erasing the restrictions or frictions that a medium imposes upon information.
Mhm.
When information is seamlessly transferred across, be it written format to audio, you have the greatest potential for consuming and also, getting the value out of that information. And so, where I think and why I think audio has seen such a continued popularity or boost, really, to your point, in the last 5 years is, I mean, it comes back to convenience. Is you have so much information out there, so much knowledge that, for decades has been published in white papers and reports and in so many different iterations in written form. And what you're seeing in podcasting is people now with, more easily accessible tools and the toolkits available for them to more easily create audio are starting to share a lot of that knowledge and also share their own experiences in a in what is become and what is recognized as the most accessible or convenient format, because there's only so much time we have in a day, and yet and to read you have to dedicate yourself. It's this active process, so it's constrained to only a certain segment of your day, or a limited amount of time. And audio has that convenience of seamlessly fitting into so many more opportunities for you to read and engage with that content. And so I think with audio, and particularly with podcasts in general, you have that coming about. And then with podcasts, you also have this conversational element, right? Like the way that you and I are communicating right now, very different from how we would discuss the same content, but maybe distilled into essay format. Our
Right.
syntax would be different. Like there wouldn't be that same dynamic. And so I think people have really, recognized and identified and resonated with that. And with podcasts, it's taken, what radio has known for a really long time and made it more convenient, more bite size. And I think, you know, Ad Auris and what we're trying to do is really complementary towards that.
Right.
Is, there will never be replaced, human conversation, but there will be, in tandem with that, the ability to listen to all of that written content that is out there as well. And I think that when you have suddenly a 1-to-1 ratio between what is in written form and what is in audio, you suddenly get a lot more flexibility and opportunity to get creative around how you meld and share information. And that's what gets me excited around what we're doing, is when we achieve that future state of everything that is in written format is in audio, there become so many more opportunities for how we can mix and match and meld and create really engaging experiences that people consume and can learn from.
Right. Right. Yeah, for sure. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and super exciting. Yeah, super exciting to see, how far we go with audio. I think we've only seen a boom in the last 5 years, but I think we're going to see it even go even further. So there's going to be more podcasts, probably more applications like Clubhouse coming up. I know Twitter Spaces, sort of clone there, but I'm sure there'll be more unique ways that people are making audio content, and yeah, super exciting to see. But talking about the product itself now, I'm transitioning a little bit. I
Yeah.
tried it out. It was great. I threw an article in there, and it was super cool. And I think, one of the biggest gripes I've had with text to speech, at least today, and I know, there's huge developments in AI happening every day. So this is changing, but especially today is just, computer generated audio doesn't seem very natural, especially when it's reading back to me. And I'm one who tends to, especially in a podcast format or in a narrative format like this, I like to have more of a natural tone. Like I think, like most people, I'm a human natural tone. And so one of the
Totally.
things that was really interesting about your product is a lot of the times when it was reading back to me, it had that natural tone. It was pausing properly in periods. It was reading it out sort of like a human would. So I was just wondering, like, what was the thought process behind that, and how are you guys achieving that? That it was super impressive.
Yeah, no. First off, thanks, and I'm happy to hear that that was your experience. And yeah, it's been one of the key kind of focal points for our product. Yeah, I mentioned that early on we identified, people were willing to forego a certain level of quality just for that accessibility. But one of the things that we've obsessed over at Adoris is, you know, in order to become a product that's not just niche and that truly is something for everyone, and part of that infrastructure by which what is written becomes available in audio, it has to be really engaging and really listenable. And so how we've gone about that and how we think about the space is, you have synthetically generated, computer generated speech models that are increasing in quality and really in prevalence as well. And so where we think of ourselves as being situated for innovation is sitting atop those various models, because as those improve, we can, harness those models. But where we concentrate and really are beginning to have our innovation stand out is in the text ingestion part of it. So say when you copy and paste an article, What we're doing is we're taking all of the text content, we're extracting it, we're analyzing it. So we're doing things like sentiment analysis, keyword extraction, starting to develop a contextual understanding of what it is that is being generated into audio.
Right.
And that is really important because what that allows us to do is layer in elements like speech synthesis markup language, which is an annotation language that we apply to, the raw text that allows us to begin to identify, pause here, emphasis there. Those same attributes of natural language that, you and I do unconsciously as we speak, we can begin to emulate and incorporate that so that when then the text goes and is read by the model, the combination of what we've done and the improved model suddenly has this really powerful voiceover. And just a little bit of a sneak peek about what we get excited to and where we see the future of audio going is it doesn't have to stop there rather. If you think to a podcast like Masters of Scale by Reid Hoffman, there are 18 people behind the scenes doing everything from the mixing and mastering, the script writing, the musical tones, the intro, the voiceover. And so what we have today is the voiceover. But where we're going is, not just taking the verbatim text from the article, but we can start to begin to alter, the syntax, make the sentences shorter, or maybe, include two speakers. So it's more of a conversation rather than what's called a voice of God reading.
Right.
And by doing that, the academic literature kind of supports is you begin to, like, the retention for when it's a conversation um, based audio much higher.
Right.
And then can we begin to use that contextual understanding of what is being narrated that we've developed to start to do things like put in musical intonations or spacing, sound effects to begin to actually create a richer and richer experience.
Mhm.
That's where we're headed, and that's what you know our platform is going to enable is end-to-end audio production. And the reason that we're able to do that is because we have audio that is AI generated from the get go. So our iteration loop and our feedback loop is really tight because once that audio is out there and distributed, say on a publication like Harvard Magazine or Dezeen out in the UK, we're having thousands of people listen to that and interact with that.
Right.
Well, those are all feedback loops. That progression bar is a feedback for us to then, begin to manipulate and play with that audio to understand exactly how we can create the most engaging audio experience possible. And that's only possible because we're using, you know, starting from a pure play in terms of computer generated audio. If we
Right.
had, a person in the recording room, be very hard to re-record or bring in another person to, create those types of changes that we're beginning to create. And so, yeah, that's how we've begun to differentiate ourselves in terms of that audio that you're hearing is that speech synthesis markup language and beginning to use multiple voices. But this is really only the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's possible, and that gets me really excited.
Right, for sure. And I think a good way I think about it at least is like audiobooks. Audiobooks are huge today because people love listening to the prepared books, love having people who, multiple voices who are voicing the characters, love having some sound effects in the background, they love having all of that. And if you
Yeah,
can translate that experience into an article format, pretend like there's an interview with LeBron James or something like that about basketball, right? Like, and if you just have those voices present there with the sound effects, it would be so cool.
yeah,
And yeah, like the accessibility conversation, conversation is there, of course. But not only that, you're also elevating the content to another level that you can't necessarily get in the text. Um, so
totally.
definitely, I think that's super exciting to hear, and
Well,
there's
and
a lot of
I mean,
potential.
yeah, even building off of what you're mentioning, right? Like if you suddenly have multiple articles, say, it's playoffs and the Lakers aren't doing so well, or they're, what you can do is begin to actually take in, articles on a similar topic, and the text ingestion then can be about taking from different perspectives, maybe, or different articles. And
Right.
because that end-to-end audio is all kind of vertically integrated on our platform, you can start to get really creative and pull from multiple sources, create a end audio, piece that is the composite of multiple sources of articles. And that's something that, when I talk about like the end state whereby everything that is written is into audio, the advantage of how we're approaching it is that it's very easy for us to take from one piece, turn it into audio, and seamlessly meld that with another perspective or another article's audio, because it's all
Mhm.
being done kind of within our system. So yeah,
Right.
that's, I mean, yeah, I just think the possibilities are endless, and it just gets me excited. Just how, like, a good analogy is really like the advent of the camera didn't kill cinema. Like, the idea that you or I have a home camera doesn't mean that we are going to go out and win the Oscar for, best production, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, having the ability to create a voiceover or an audio piece of written content does not mean or exclude the opportunity for a much richer experience. And that's what we're after, and that's what we're building the infrastructure to go out and do.
Right.
um, and we have all of the source material being generated every day, right? There are
Mhm.
millions of articles and topics out there being published, and we want to bring that audio level of audio and that degree of fidelity to all of it.
Yeah, 100%. That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, yeah, I mean, there's sometimes you still want the text interface, right? There's a reason why no matter what, we're still, voice interfaces haven't taken over. We're not just using Siri to do everything, right?
Totally.
We're using, we're using text and our hands and interacting with the machine for a reason, because that's still very convenient. But having the option, like you mentioned, there is huge. And then yeah, there's also like different benefits that the audio medium can provide. Like you mentioned there, like if you just summarize all these different texts, and then you have each speaker sort of telling you the summary of what they think about a certain event, that could be a really cool thing to have in audio. It would be cool in text as well, but it'd be very cool in audio. So yeah, I think there's a lot of really cool things on the horizon, and a lot of opportunities to grow and to grow the product and to grow the brand. And that sort of transitions actually to my next question I was going to ask you. So, it
Yeah.
seems like Ad Auris has now come up with its first product. You guys have done some validation there. It's trying to get a little bit of traction, trying to get starting to get a little bit more customers. I assume you're trying to go for some partnerships. So I think I just want to get your thoughts when it comes to growing the platform and growing the company. What is some of your strategies there, and what is your thought process behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the our approaches that is perhaps a little unique from other, say, just pure play like text to speech, be it an API or what else is out there, um, is we've taken kind of a two-sided marketplace approach, in that when we started, we took a stance that the best way to disseminate our product and get it out there was to go out and work with publications. So we
Mhm.
actually began by working with publications, and tremendous shout out to some of the teams that were, really open to innovating and experimenting with us, like the Conversation Canada. But what we found is, by working with publications, and we've begun to, build up a roster of these publications, so we're approaching 200 plus. What we found is, you know they will partner with us. We're generating all of their content into audio, and as soon as they publish an article, we're generating the audio version in seconds. An audio player there appears right there on the page, and
Right.
so for all of their readership, suddenly we have top of page, top of presence, and that's tremendous exposure for us. What we
Mhm.
found is that actually then becomes a really good funnel for us for how individuals come across our platform and understand that there is actually a user facing platform that they can use all by themselves, separate of that publication. So
Right.
you start to have, through this, our B2B partnerships, the exposure and creating that top of funnel for individuals who are coming across our audio platform, realizing, hey, for the 20 other tabs I have open, this is something that would be fantastic. Clicking in, creating an account, and beginning to use. And so that's where what we see is kind of as our publication partnerships grow, that's having a positive impact on our user base on the individual side. And the more individuals we have in the ecosystem, we can get really experimental with how do we, suggest content, or do we show them, here's a lot of the other stuff that other people are creating audio versions of. Take a listen to this.
Right.
Here are some of these partner publications. Take a listen to this. And so you're starting to see this kind of positive feedback loop, and that's a focus um, of ours in the next 6 months, is really just beginning and continuing to foster that. Um, that said, what we've also found really interesting on the individual facing side is simply that there are segments of folks, be it in specific professions or geographies, that really, really resonate strongly with the value proposition today. And so, to give you an example, what we found is actually, and in we have a number of publications that are in throughout Mexico and Latin America, and what we found is they were really eager to offer audio because some of their audiences, it was very fundamental from an accessibility standpoint. So people were calling into those publications beforehand, asking for the content to be read to them. And so when they found our solution, that was kind of a match made in heaven. But what we've seen is that in geographies like some of those in Latin America, where radio is very prominent and mobile is, by far the way of consuming media, it's a lot harder to read on mobile than it is on desktop. And so you see
Right.
a really high saliency with what we've built already. And so part of our growth strategy is, having identified this short list of starting niches, is to just begin to seed that and really help those communities grow. And we have kind of a unique product in that it is a horizontal product. So everyone reads content. Everyone at one point or another could benefit from having audio versions of that written content. But the question that always is kind of top of mind for us is like, where do we start? Where do we grow? And then kind of, build out from there. And so
Right.
that prioritization of this segment has been really important for us. And that's the kind of experimentation and the process that we're undergoing right now.
Right.
Building more general awareness, like the product hunt launches and launching on Reddit and indie hackers and those platforms, is fantastic. But what we've begun to really, narrow in is that ICP of that initial segment, and build
Right.
those communities out.
For sure, yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. I think having working with publications, I think, are obviously huge because that convenience factor, like you mentioned, and the accessibility factor. If it's on the content itself, it's obviously a lot easier just to press play and it's already there. But seeing that funnel towards your B2C product, is huge because you all go down that path. You realize that it's not only this content; it's anything on the web, and the possibilities are really endless. And I think it also pushes more partners to join your platform. So it
Yeah.
definitely makes a lot of sense. And I think yeah, targeting different markets, like you mentioned, like LATAM, it might be more. Even though America is very prone to audio content, they might be even more so on that trajectory. That's a very smart way of going about it too. So it's really exciting to see where you guys go, and yeah, really excited to see the future of Ad Auris. But yeah, thank you so much, Logan, for coming onto the podcast. It's been great. Before I let you go, I have two questions. The first one is, and this is a little bit ironic given the product, but what is a book you recommend us reading, or I guess in your case, listening to?
No, it's a good question, and there's nothing that can replace, I think, sitting down and reading. And that's actually one of the things that we found is actually the highest retention, highest engagement with material comes when you're reading and listening. And that's
Mm,
something that we did not think of, but we've heard from like teachers and folks around that use case. So definitely suggest reading this book, but also listening to it maybe at the same time. Um,
okay.
for me, like I think it's an older one. It's like from 2007, Black Swan by Nassim Taleb, and it's interesting. I think his tone in the book is it can be quite brash, or he's very opinionated individual. But what is really interesting about his approach is, I think, getting you to think in like non-linearities, and I think that's kind of the name of the game for entrepreneurship, is realizing that you know a venture, and particularly if you want to become a VC backed startup, it's about swinging for the fences.
Right.
And your job is to try and really think as audaciously as you can, and really move the needle in terms of what is possible. And I think that book really delves into how to, or just the mindset of thinking about setting yourself up for how to benefit from nonlinear events, and fortuitous circumstance. So even so far as the idea of like, you want to set yourself up for a fundraise, just go out and be as social as possible and try and put yourself in as many circumstances where you can perhaps meet, and by just happen chance have a beneficial interaction. And I think like, and that's a example of kind of a positive, you're strengthened by randomness in that scenario. And so I think, yeah, it's a really great book. I mean, it can get quite technical, but also coming from my background of having capital markets and helping trade options and whatnot, and it was a fun kind of bridge between the entrepreneurial and the finance. So really loved it. And I think it's just, yeah, it's very thought provoking for sure.
Okay, well, I'll definitely check it out. Even though it's 2007, that's not that long ago, and obviously the classics are always good. And I guess 2007 is now a classic book, so yeah, I'll make sure to give it a read or give it a listen, like you mentioned. And yeah, I think it's super interesting. Like you sort of mentioned this that the book touches on putting yourself in the right position and just trying to meet the right people and setting yourself up for opportunities. And I think especially in today's date, with everything that happened in the pandemic and just, everybody being sort of available now digitally, I think there's not been a better time for that. So I think
Totally.
that message rings true even more so today, and it's probably a great book to read.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, case in point is the fact that we're able to have this conversation, and I think that's something that's normalized very much by the pandemic. And yeah, you just, if you accept that you don't know kind of the future, then you're always looking for ways where you can benefit from the unexpected or from that randomness. And so I think startups are a great example of kind of that mindset taken to a little bit of an extreme. But yeah.
Sounds good. Well, last question I have, and this is, I guess, the most straightforward question in the podcast, but what are the next steps for you and Ad Auris? What can we look forward to?
You know what, for Ad Auris, we're heads down building for the next couple months, but we're getting ready to go out and raise our seed round. So yeah, we were fortunate enough to be able to raise from a great group of folks last year, and I think like just on the traction and the learnings, we're gearing up for a fundraise. So that's definitely going to be the next step. So I'm going to be pretty busy here in the next little while, starting to get ready for that, and really just communicate and help share with the world more of what we've been able to achieve and where we're going. So
Right.
that's the immediate future. But yeah, I'm really excited to kind of continue to ride the wave.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm no VC, but just based on this conversation, I think you guys have a great team and a good foundation. So I would invest in you guys' seed round. So if anybody's interested, feel free to reach out to Logan. I'm sure you guys can have a great conversation. But yeah, I think that'll go pretty well for you guys, but hopefully at least.
Yeah, no,
But yeah,
and I mean, on that point, we're always looking to have, like, I'm personally always trying to have calls with our users. And so if anyone, who happens to see this also, checks out our platform, and, it's free to use, always happy to hop on calls and collaborate and really just push for how can we create an even better experience.
For sure, yeah. And I'll throw the links in the bio. But thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Thank you so much, Logan, for coming onto the podcast. Until the next one, take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.